The knock on the office door was soft, but it made Emily Carter look up immediately, and when she saw Daniel Brooks step inside, she felt the air shift in a way she could not explain. He stood tall but carried himself with quiet hesitation, his jacket still on as if he was not sure how long he would stay, and his eyes, tired yet steady, moved around the small elementary school office before resting on her face, where she offered a professional but warm smile, inviting him to sit, and as he lowered himself into the chair across from her desk, he held his hands together tightly, not in anger but in worry, the kind that keeps a parent awake at night. He cleared his throat and said he hoped he was not overreacting, but he had concerns about Lily, and at the sound of her student's name, Emily leaned forward gently, ready to listen, because she had noticed changes too. The once lively girl who used to raise her hand first now sat near the window, drawing tiny shapes in the corners of her notebook, her bright laugh replaced by quiet nods and soft answers. Daniel explained that at home, Lily had been distant, spending more time alone in her room, pretending to read while staring at pages without turning them, and he admitted he did not know if it was grief, growing up, or something happening at school, and as he spoke, his voice did not shake, but there was a heaviness in it that made Emily's heart ache, because this was not a man looking to blame someone, this was a father afraid of losing connection with his child. She assured him Lily was kind and respectful in class, that she completed her work even if she seemed distracted, and she carefully described the small moments she had seen, how Lily smiled when helping another student, how she lit up during art projects, how she still carried a quiet strength inside her, and Daniel listened as if every word mattered deeply, nodding slowly, his eyes softening with relief, and then he shared something more personal. Almost as if he had not planned to say it, that Lily's mother had passed away 2 years ago after a long illness, and since then, their house had felt different, too quiet, too still, and he worried that he had been so focused on being strong that he might have missed the signs that Lily was hurting again. Emily felt a deep respect for him in that moment, because vulnerability does not come easy, especially in a small town where everyone seems to know each other's business, and she spoke with care, suggesting that children sometimes carry grief in waves, that certain seasons or memories can bring it back without warning, and Daniel exhaled slowly, as if someone had finally given shape to his silent fear. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting light across the desk between them, and for a brief second, the meeting felt less like a formal conference and more like two adults trying to protect the same child. And Emily noticed the faint tired lines near his eyes, the way he chose his words thoughtfully, the way he thanked her for even noticing Lily's change, and she realized that behind his calm presence was a man doing his best without a guide. She suggested small steps, encouraging Lily to join group activities, perhaps speaking with the school counselor if needed, and Daniel agreed, grateful for direction, but before standing to leave, he paused and looked at her with an expression that was not dramatic or intense, just sincere, and he said he appreciated not only her professionalism but her kindness, because kindness, he explained, had been rare during the hardest months of his life. The words were simple, yet they stayed with her long after he spoke them, and as he walked toward the door, he hesitated slightly, turning back as if debating whether to add something else, but instead he offered a small, almost shy smile and said he hoped they could stay in close contact about Lily's progress, and Emily nodded, assuring him they would, and when the door finally closed behind him, the office felt strangely quieter than before, not empty, just thoughtful, and she found herself staring at the chair where he had sat, replaying the meeting in her mind, not because anything inappropriate had happened, but because something meaningful had, something built on shared concern and quiet understanding. She reminded herself that she was Lily's teacher first, that her duty was clear, yet she could not ignore the gentle pull she felt, not toward romance, not yet, but toward connection, toward the way Daniel had spoken with honesty instead of pride, toward the respect in his tone when he addressed her, and she realized that sometimes the strongest beginnings are not loud or dramatic but start with a simple conversation about a child who needs help. Outside, children's laughter echoed across the playground, life moving forward as it always does, and Emily gathered her notes, determined to support Lily with renewed focus. Yet somewhere in her thoughts lingered the image of a father sitting across from her desk, carrying concern like a weight on his shoulders, and she sensed that this meeting, though ordinary on the surface, had quietly opened a door neither of them had expected, leaving behind the faint but undeniable feeling that their lives had just intersected in a way that might matter more than either of them realized. Over the next few weeks, Daniel Brooks became a familiar presence at the school, though always careful not to overstep, and Emily Carter found herself noticing small things about him she hadn't before: the way he smiled at Lily's stories, the way he listened without judgment, and the way he carried a quiet sadness behind his eyes that seemed almost private, like a locked room he only let her glimpse through careful words. Sometimes he arrived early to pick Lily up, other times he lingered in the parking lot to ask questions about her progress, always polite, always concerned, and Emily admired that because he never blamed anyone, never demanded results, he simply wanted to understand how to help his daughter thrive. And during one particularly rainy afternoon, he rushed in, soaked from the storm, apologizing for dripping water onto the office floor, and Emily grabbed a towel from the lost and found box, handing it to him, and when their fingers brushed, the touch was fleeting, almost accidental, but it left a warmth lingering in the space between them, a small spark neither could fully acknowledge, and she quickly pulled back, reminding herself of boundaries, of professionalism, of the careful lines drawn between teacher and parent. Yet even as she did, she felt her heart tug in ways she could not explain, realizing that their interactions had begun to mean something more than the simple concern for a student. Emily had spent years focusing on her career, telling herself that love could wait, that life was about purpose, stability, and helping others, and yet Daniel's presence challenged that careful order, because in his voice, in his thoughtful eyes, she saw grief, dedication, patience, and a longing that mirrored her own, a quiet loneliness that had built over years of waiting and loss. And one evening, after a school event, they found themselves alone in the hallway, the lights dim, the building hushed, and Daniel thanked her sincerely for helping Lily find her smile again, and Emily replied with the same warmth, pointing out that Lily's progress was because of the love and effort he put into her life. And for a moment, their eyes met and held longer than usual, a silent conversation passing between them, full of unspoken understanding, respect, and perhaps the faintest hint of desire, though both were careful to acknowledge only the work, the child, the responsibilities that tethered them to the present. Yet even in that careful acknowledgement, a new awareness had begun to form, because they both recognized in each other someone who had walked through hardship, someone who had learned to hold back tears, someone who knew what it was to feel love for someone else yet carry the weight of the past. And while nothing had changed outwardly, meetings remained formal, conversations remained polite, the undercurrent of connection deepened with every shared smile, every quiet reassurance, every moment spent discussing Lily's small triumphs. And Emily noticed that she thought about him long after he left the office, that she replayed his words, his tone, his kindness, and wondered if life always carried the possibility of something unexpected. Even in the most ordinary spaces, she remembered the way he laughed softly when Lily told a funny story, the way he exhaled in relief when Emily described Lily's progress, the subtle lines in his face that hinted at sleepless nights and constant worry. And she realized that admiration had shifted into something more complex, a mix of care, attraction, and profound empathy that made her pulse quicken yet demanded caution, because the world around them was full of rules, full of expectations, and above all, she had to remain the teacher, professional and responsible. But Daniel's presence reminded her that the heart does not always follow rules, that sometimes it notices before the mind can decide. And so they continued this delicate dance, exchanging insights about homework, manners, friendship, Lily's happiness, all while skirting the edge of something personal that neither dared name aloud. And Emily found herself thinking about him on quiet nights, about how grief could be shared, How connection could be found in unexpected ways, how two people who had experienced loss, isolation, and responsibility could find solace in one another's understanding, and Daniel too thought of her when the day ended, when Lily was asleep, when he sat alone in his kitchen, wondering if kindness could ever blossom into more, but not wanting to overstep, not wanting to ruin the careful bond they had formed for Lily's sake. The tension was gentle, almost imperceptible, but it existed. In the small glances, in the moments their hands brushed, in the shared silences that spoke volumes, and Emily knew that she had begun to care for him beyond professional duty, that there was a fragile longing threaded through every conversation, every email, every brief encounter in the office, and she realized that while she could not act recklessly, she could honor this connection, this slow and quiet understanding that had grown from mutual respect and shared concern. And when they parted that evening, leaving the dim hallway behind, both carried the weight of feelings unspoken, a tender recognition that sometimes attraction is not loud, sometimes romance is not instant, but sometimes it lingers in glances, touches, and the gentle warmth of someone who truly sees you. And as Emily walked back to her empty classroom, she felt the unusual thrill of anticipation mixed with caution, knowing that her life had subtly shifted, that Daniel's visits were no longer just about Lily, that the spark had been lit, gentle, careful, restrained, but real, and somewhere deep inside, both wondered if, given time, patience, and honesty, this quiet connection could grow into something meaningful, while still protecting the child who had unknowingly brought them together. And the days that followed were filled with this new awareness, each meeting layered with professional care and the unspoken emotional undercurrent that made every conversation feel important, intimate, and unexpectedly hopeful. And Emily could not deny that something had begun, something she could not yet name. Something that had changed the rhythm of her workdays, her thoughts, and her heart. Rumors in a small town travel fast, and Emily Carter knew that better than anyone, which is why she tried to maintain careful boundaries with Daniel Brooks, keeping their conversations professional, polite, and strictly about Lily, while internally, she battled a growing awareness that her feelings were no longer simple, no longer just admiration for a parent doing his best, because Daniel had begun to feel familiar in a way that tugged gently at her heart, and she noticed that when he came to school, he seemed slightly different, more relaxed around her, more willing to linger in brief moments of quiet conversation, yet still respectful, aware of her role, and conscious of the delicate line that separated them. One crisp autumn afternoon, as they stood outside the school near the maple trees shedding golden leaves, Daniel asked softly if he had done something to upset her, and Emily hesitated, taking in the way the sunlight flickered through the branches, how the wind carried leaves across the parking lot, and finally she admitted that she valued her position as Lily's teacher and wanted to avoid any misunderstanding. And Daniel listened, nodding slowly, his expression open, patient, and earnest, and then he said something that caught her off guard, something simple yet charged with vulnerability, that his visits were not just about Lily's concerns, that sometimes he came because he needed someone who understood, someone who could see beyond the surface. And Emily felt her chest tighten as she realized he was not asking for anything inappropriate, that he respected her professionalism, but he was revealing his loneliness, his trust, and the quiet longing that she herself had begun to feel when she thought of him, and she wanted to step closer, to tell him that she felt the same, yet caution restrained her, reminding her of the responsibilities they both carried, of the eyes of the community that might watch, and of Lily, who needed stability and focus. Meanwhile, Daniel's honesty hung in the air like a fragile thread connecting them, a thread that was both comforting and dangerous, because it acknowledged feelings that could not yet be acted upon, and Emily realized that respect and attraction could coexist without breaking boundaries, that connection could grow silently in shared glances, in subtle understanding, and in moments when words fell short. As the days passed, Emily observed Lily thriving more and more, her laughter returning, her confidence growing, and she saw the love and effort Daniel poured into her daughter, the patient encouragement, the quiet support, the way he celebrated small victories without fanfare, and it drew Emily closer to him emotionally, even as she maintained professional distance, and she began to understand that people who experience loss and solitude often notice each other, recognize shared pain, and find solace in simple companionship. And this awareness made her heart ache and swell at the same time. Because the pull she felt for Daniel was real, tender, and deeply human, Emily also noticed how Daniel carried himself, sometimes tired, sometimes with a fleeting smile, sometimes with eyes that betrayed sleepless nights and long reflections, and she caught herself wondering what it would be like to step outside professional boundaries safely, not recklessly, and to connect with him on a personal level, even if only in conversation or shared quiet moments. Yet fear was present too, the fear of misunderstanding, of scandal, of professional risk, and she reminded herself constantly that her first duty was Lily's education and well-being, that her heart had to navigate carefully, and Daniel seemed aware of this as well, never pushing, never making her uncomfortable, simply acknowledging the bond that had developed between them, a bond formed through shared care, empathy, and gentle honesty. On evenings when the school emptied, Emily replayed their conversations in her mind, the way his voice softened when he spoke of Lily, the way his hands rested lightly on her desk while explaining small concerns, the way his eyes communicated what words could not, and she realized that boundaries were not always walls, but sometimes delicate lines that could hold respect and affection together, and that this awareness itself was a lesson in patience and emotional intelligence. Meanwhile, Daniel thought of her as he drove home, recalling the steady calm in her tone, the way she understood his concerns without judgment, the way she offered guidance while also showing humanity, and he felt a mixture of gratitude and longing, understanding that what they had could not be rushed, but that it was something rare and precious, a quiet connection that made the world seem less lonely. And as the weeks continued, Emily and Daniel maintained their careful dance, each encounter filled with warmth, professionalism, subtle attraction, and unspoken understanding, a rhythm that neither could define but both could feel. And Emily noticed that her thoughts lingered on him longer, that she smiled more at his visits, that her heart responded to the simplest acknowledgement from him, and she recognized that this emotional bond had become an integral part of her days, a presence both comforting and stirring, and she accepted the complexity of it, knowing that deep human connection often comes at inconvenient times and in unexpected forms, and that respecting boundaries did not mean shutting off feeling. Daniel, in turn, respected her space while cherishing the moments they shared, feeling an emotional closeness that made him both cautious and hopeful, and he admired her integrity, her dedication, and the quiet warmth she brought to every interaction, recognizing that their connection was built on trust, empathy, and the shared love for Lily, which made every meeting meaningful beyond words. Slowly, the subtle tension grew, a delicate thread of attraction interwoven with care, respect, and mutual understanding, creating a bond neither could ignore, a bond that hovered at the edges of possibility, yet always mindful of responsibility, and Emily realized that even though they could not openly explore this connection, it was shaping her life in profound ways, teaching her patience, awareness, and the beauty of noticing someone deeply without acting impulsively. And as autumn deepened, with leaves falling around the school grounds, both she and Daniel felt that their quiet closeness was becoming one of the most significant parts of their daily lives, a gentle, unspoken romance rooted in empathy, trust, and the shared human experience of longing, connection, and hope, leaving them each wondering when, if ever, the next chapter might allow their hearts to meet more fully while still protecting the child who had unknowingly brought them together. Spring arrived gently, bringing warmth and color back to the small town, and with it came the end of the school year, a milestone filled with excitement and bittersweet moments, and Emily Carter watched as Lily Brooks walked confidently across the classroom, her backpack snug on her shoulders, her smile wide and bright, the once distant little girl now full of life and joy, laughing with her friends, sharing stories she had kept hidden for months, and Emily felt a swell of pride knowing that she had witnessed and quietly helped this transformation, while Daniel Brooks stood nearby, observing with a tender, protective gaze, his chest rising with relief and gratitude, happy to see his daughter thriving after months of worry and silence. And as Lily hugged Emily goodbye, whispering a heartfelt, "Thank you for believing in me," Emily felt the weight of all the days they had spent navigating challenges together, the small victories, the moments of laughter and concern, the emotional growth, and she realized that the bond between teacher, student, and parent had become unexpectedly profound, leaving traces of warmth in her heart she had not anticipated. Daniel waited patiently, standing in the soft spring sunlight, hands in his pockets, eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation, and when Lily ran ahead to meet friends in the playground, he approached Emily, stepping lightly, careful not to startle, and spoke in a voice steady yet laced with vulnerability, telling her that soon, Lily would be transferring to a new school in Seattle because of a job opportunity he had accepted. News that hit Emily with a pang of disappointment she tried to mask, knowing she had grown used to both Lily's presence and the quiet connection she had developed with Daniel over the past months, but she kept her composure, nodding politely, yet her heart thumped with a mixture of sadness and longing. Daniel continued, explaining that he had waited to speak with her directly, out of respect for her professional position and to avoid disrupting Lily's stability, but now, with the school year ending and no boundaries left to blur, he wanted to ask something that had been on his mind for weeks, something personal yet simple, an invitation that carried no pressure, no scandal, just the hope of companionship, and Emily's pulse quickened as she realized what he meant, sensing the careful courage behind his words, the way he balanced honesty and respect, the way he had acknowledged their shared connection without overstepping, and she felt a flutter of hope she had not expected, understanding that this was a moment of genuine choice, a chance to allow herself to step into something new without fear or impropriety. Daniel asked if she would consider having dinner with him, a casual, respectful invitation, and Emily looked into his eyes, seeing sincerity, patience, and the quiet longing that had grown between them over months of meetings, emails, and small, meaningful interactions, and she realized that the man standing before her was not just a parent, not just a concerned father, but someone who had become deeply significant to her, someone who had seen her heart and soul through moments of vulnerability, patience, and mutual understanding, and for the first time, she felt the freedom to respond without hiding behind professionalism, without fearing judgment, because everything else, the school year, the responsibilities, the routines, was shifting, leaving them at the edge of possibility. Emily smiled softly, feeling warmth rise through her chest, a combination of relief, anticipation, and tender excitement, and she said yes, letting the word linger in the air like sunlight through spring leaves. And Daniel's response was a quiet, heartfelt smile that mirrored her own, an acknowledgement that something delicate and genuine had begun, and that this was the start of a new chapter, one built not on haste or desire alone, but on respect, understanding, shared care, and the emotional journey they had navigated together. As they walked out of the empty school hallway side by side, the air filled with birdsong and the scent of blooming flowers, Emily realized that love often arrives quietly, unexpectedly, in moments of shared concern, in the pauses between words, in glances that linger too long, and in small acts of kindness and understanding, and she understood that what had begun with Lily's growth and Daniel's fatherly devotion had grown into a connection that could, with patience and care, become something beautiful between two adults who had experienced loss, longing, and the need for companionship. Daniel felt a quiet relief too, knowing that the invitation had been accepted, that their bond, nurtured over months of concern for Lily and thoughtful interactions, could now take a new shape, one of mutual respect, adult affection, and potential romance, without secrecy or impropriety, and he looked forward to learning more about Emily outside the confines of school, to sharing laughter and conversation as equals, to exploring the warmth that had been quietly building between them. As they parted that afternoon, both aware of the change in their relationship, Emily felt a sense of hope she had not felt in years, a recognition that life could surprise her with beauty when least expected, and that meaningful connections are often the result of patience, understanding, and emotional courage. And Daniel walked to his car with a lighter step, heart buoyed by anticipation, thankful that the school year had ended not with loss, but with a beginning, knowing that the time spent nurturing his daughter had also nurtured the potential for something lasting, tender, and true between them. And as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the clouds with gold, Emily returned to her empty classroom, smiling softly to herself, aware that sometimes love does not arrive in dramatic gestures or bold confessions, but quietly, in offices and hallways, in moments of shared concern, respect, and unspoken understanding, and that the future, while uncertain, was now filled with possibility, promise, and the gentle excitement of something beautiful beginning, born from months of care, patience, and quiet hearts finally willing to meet.